The South Korean military issued DEFCON 3 to all troops in preparation for any possible situation. Everyone was ordered to be ready to leave their posts at any moment and remain on standby. DEFCON has reached level 2 only 3 times since the Republic of Korea was founded. First was the 1976 Panmunjom Axe murder incident, then the December 26, 1979 Seoul incident, followed by the 1983 Aung San Mausoleum bombing. Now, another has occurred. With large-scale Chinese intervention in Korea, the whole peninsula is now shrouded in darkness. Dark clouds cover the city, and the air is thick with dust and smoke. The Sambong Company of the 190th Cooperative Brigade 79th Group Army of the Homeland has arrived here. Company Commander Ju Jin-ying stands at the front, scanning the map and surveying the area. Instead of tension, he looks relaxed because the North Korean army resisted less than expected. Next to him, Administrative Officer Baipi holds a radio and provides cover. They are advancing toward Pyongyang and may arrive in 3 hours. Ju Jin-ying hears this and laughs briefly. He hadn't expected to advance so fast. His focus shifts to the target, Pyongyang. It was crucial to the operation and could alter the war's course. Reports on follow-up units kept coming in. The 200th Brigade of the Group Army, including armored units, would arrive soon. Ju Jin-ying reacts with an interesting expression. He is already picturing in his mind how the entry of tanks will change the battle, but soon a look of doubt appears on his face. He couldn't understand why the 78th Group Army was included under their command. But there was no time to linger on that thought. Suddenly, an explosion rips through the air. An anti-tank missile struck the Vanguard Company, causing a huge explosion and pillar of fire as Bipe screamed across the battlefield. We immediately went into combat mode, but another missile was already flying in and destroying an armored vehicle. They were anti-tank missiles being launched by North Korea's 8th Corps. They were pouring them out at Maeseo-ji, but even this kind of attack was reaching its limit. They were running out of missiles. Some were saying we needed to retreat quickly, but retreat would mean defeat in the war. Amidst the smoke and flames, the cries of people and the sound of metal being torn apart mixed together, turning the battlefield into pure chaos. Company Commander Ju Jin-ying gritted his teeth and shouted as the lines collapsed, but the situation quickly worsened. To stop the advance of the Chinese army, the North Korean forces fought desperately until the very end, and at this moment, Pyeongchang had become the fiercest battleground on the road to Pyongyang. On a night when heavy rain was pounding against the windows, the president's office in the Blue House was shrouded in deep darkness. Then the phone began to ring. At that moment, the voice of South Korean President Lee Myung-hwan echoed through the room. On the other end was President Trump of the United States. There was a sense of urgency in his voice. Reports said Chinese forces controlled all of North Korea, with both Sinuiju and Pyongyang threatened. President Lee Myung-hwan spoke. When Pyongyang falls, the Korean peninsula's balance will be lost. His voice was more determined than shaky. The room fell silent, everyone awaiting President Trump's response. The answer was that he would watch and see. President Lee Myung-hwan's tone suddenly became sharp. If all you do is watch, it's over. He also warned that China was already seeking a route to the East Sea. He stressed this was an East Asian security crisis, not just a North Korean issue. President Trump stayed silent. President Lee Myung-hwan was visibly angry and protested, demanding how much longer they would stand by and watch. He stated that South Korea was fully prepared and would act independently if the United States did not. Those words were a warning, signaling that they were prepared to act independently, beyond the framework of the alliance. President Trump's silence created an atmosphere of rejection, followed by a firm statement from President Lee Myung-hwan. He said this wasn't just a Korean peninsula issue, but a threat to Taiwan, the Philippines, Japan, and even the United States mainland. His words were sharp and direct. Again, silence fell until President Lee Myung-hwan finally decided. He declared that the South Korean military would act alone if needed and would risk everything to defend the people's sovereignty. No matter what the cost, there was a bitter conviction in his voice. President Lee Myung-hwan let out a slow sigh and then put down the phone. Heavy rain poured under the black sky, raindrops tapping the window. This is the 17th Infantry Division. It's the 100th Infantry Brigade located in Gyeonggu, Incheon. After DEFCON 3 was declared, all personnel put on their gear and began sorting all supplies within the base. They even had combat rations for dinner. One soldier complained about the black beans in his meal. It wasn't the new type. Meanwhile, the 109th Infantry Brigade continued sorting supplies. The red ones are the loading boxes, but there were many new recruits who were confused due to lack of proper training. They often lost their magazine pouches by not attaching them and leaving them on their lockers. The sorting of supplies was nearly finished. Meanwhile, something unusual was noticed at the radar site of the 100th Infantry Brigade. More than 50 aircraft were detected over the West Sea. Normally, civilian aircraft coming from China to Korea head from below the Shandong Peninsula to Incheon, but these planes were all heading from above the Shandong Peninsula toward North Korea. No matter how you looked at it, it was a strange sight. The Joint Chiefs of Staff received this information, saw the planes, and immediately had a hunch. They said this was like a trumpet that could start a great war. Then the Joint Chiefs of Staff received shocking news. They said the Chinese military appeared to have airlifted a large force into Pyongyang. Pyongyang's fall was near. They had traveled dozens of kilometers in a single day. There seemed to be no resistance from the North Korean army. South Korean public opinion was divided, sparking heated debate on when to advance north. A major battle finally erupted in North Korea in that situation. The location was Pyeongseong, roughly 30 kilometers straight from Pyongyang. Under pressure to capture Pyongyang quickly, the Chinese army advanced without fully knowing North Korea's road conditions, causing problems. North Korea's leaders have admitted at summits that the roads are inconvenient, highlighting the country's poor road conditions. Thus, roads and railways are always top priorities for inter-Korean economic cooperation at every summit. North Korea's transportation network is so poor, it's nearly non-existent. In 2019, North Korea had 26,196 kilometers of roads, about a quarter of South Korea's total. On top of that, it has been found that less than 20% of the main roads are paved. In these outdated facilities, they traveled 150 kilometers in a day, so the equipment couldn't handle it. The 191st Composite Brigade's motorized troops arrived by vehicle instead of walking, but faced many maintenance problems. In that case, the Pyongyang Defense Command of the North Korean Army attacked Chinese forces first. This elite unit operates under the Guard Command. General Guak Chang-sik ordered the attack on Chinese forces. The Hangi Brigade of the Pyongyang Defense Command had about 5,000 troops, which is more than the usual 1,500 troops in a regular North Korean brigade. First, the Hangi Brigade attacked the Chinese 191st Combined Brigade. They waited by the road, and after the lead vehicle passed, attacked the middle of the convoy. These troops had noticeably different combat abilities than North Korea's 8th Corps 112th Alert Infantry Brigade at the border. They ambushed the enemy from both flanks to cause confusion. Because the Chinese Army's 191st Composite Brigade prioritized mobility over firepower, they had to retreat after the initial attack. A North Korean surprise attack destroyed 6 Chinese vehicles and killed 32 soldiers. Of course, it's true that the North Korean army fought well at this time, but that doesn't mean they overwhelmingly defeated the Chinese army. North Korea's army faced many issues, and despite their surprise attack, they suffered higher casualties. When using anti-tank weapons, you must know the enemy's direction, and if they're a combined arms force, simply hiding and ambushing isn't sufficient. Anti-tank weapons, by their nature, tend to reveal their position easily due to the backblast that occurs when they are fired. Due to their vulnerability, nearby infantry must protect the anti-tank team after they fire their weapons. But in this case, the anti-tank team and the infantry set up separate positions, so after firing, the anti-tank teams were subjected to concentrated attacks, and as a result, all the anti-tank teams were wiped out after the first shot. The rest of the North Korean troops were destroyed by Chinese army vehicles, mainly because they lacked real combat experience. The Chinese army also fired guns at North Koreans in some incidents. The North Korean army showed ongoing unrest after hearing the Chinese army had entered. North Korean dissidents consistently relayed this news to South Korea and the United States. North Korean submarines that disappeared were later found in large numbers at a North Pyongan province base. The Navy was continuously supporting Kim Yo-jong, and they were evacuating her to a safe place using a submarine. After the Chinese military intervened, Kim Yo-jong reappeared in North Pyongan province, where Chinese forces were present. Kim Yo-jong was seen heading back to Pyongyang with the Chinese military. At the same time, the Kim Yo-jong faction who had survived also began to be active again. Guak Chang-sik's biggest mistake was not capturing Kim Yo-jong early. Jo Sajang-hakso, who survived, had been preparing for a long time. They created an anti-Guak Chang-sik faction and eventually succeeded. These people were unhappy with Guak Chang-sik's unilateral cabinet formation and personnel changes. When they learned Kim Yo-jong was returning alive, they stopped fighting, leaving some defensive lines exposed. The Chinese army soon resumed its advance after briefly retreating due to a North Korean surprise attack. They prioritized firepower over mobility. The 200th Combined Brigade of the 79th Group Army arriving from the rear led. The 200th Combined Brigade was a medium unit with a wheeled armored vehicle battalion. They placed armored vehicles in front and advanced slowly. The North Korean Guard Command was surprised by the armored vehicles, but kept fighting. because they believed that the previously ordered North Korean 12th Corps would attack the rear of the Chinese forces, but this belief was quickly shattered. The North Korean 12th Corps surrendered on Kim Yo-jong's command. The Guard Command thought they could delay the battle in Pyongyang, but it appeared this wouldn't last long either. As I mentioned earlier, China's airborne troops conducted a large-scale airdrop near Pyongyang and Pyeongchang. Of course, North Korea has a pretty dense air defense network, like a spider web. North Korea operates a triple or even quadruple layered spiderweb air defense network at different altitudes, mainly centered around the surface-to-air series North Korean surface-to-air missiles. The United States CIA has even assessed that the density of North Korea's air defense network is among the highest in the world. North Korea's air defense system integrates Air Force aircraft, surface-to-air missiles, anti-aircraft guns, and radar units. Surface-to-air, 3 surface-to-air, 2 and surface-to-air, 5 surface-to-air missiles are widely deployed near key military sites, such as nuclear facilities and intercontinental ballistic missile and submarine-launched ballistic missile bases. They have established a multi-layered interception defense network that intercepts and shoots down targets step by step according to their altitude of appearance. These missiles usually operate by detecting targets with their own radar, then, after launch, detonating hundreds or thousands of fragmentary warheads near the target to shoot it down. The problem is that all of these air defense networks are commanded by the Air Force headquarters. The Air Force was loyal to Kim Yo-jong. China's airborne troops completed airlifts safely without damage from North Korea's dense air defenses. In fact, since China's radars were also jamming, it was a situation where proper interception wasn't even possible. Chinese troops recklessly airdropped in the Pyongyang Church and Pyeongchang areas. Riding that momentum, China's 200th Composite Air Force Brigade advanced with armored vehicles, pressuring the Pyongyang Garrison Command. Despite being on the defensive, the North Korean army suffered casualties from attacks on both sides. Some even died fighting each other in groups of 5, and the Chinese army suffered heavy losses. Statistically, aside from those who died instantly in battle, about 70% of those who could have been saved might have survived if they had received proper first aid. This statistic is from the United States during the Iraq War. China overlooked sending CC-3 to the battlefield without proper training. They just taught them basics like using a pressure bandage and tourniquet before sending them out. They didn't teach basic first aid, like using a 3-sided occlusive dressing or nasopharyngeal airway. On the battlefield, everyone must be a medic. There were many people who could have been saved if only proper first aid had been given. During the recent Pyongyang battle, there were a total of 673 seriously wounded. Over 90% or 606 people died during evacuation without treatment. They could have survived. There were also many civilian casualties during this process. Protecting civilians was meant to be the priority, but North Korea and China didn't truly care about it. The Chinese army drove out the North Korean forces resisting in the Pyeongchang area and succeeded in advancing as far as north of Pyongyang. They even managed to enter Pyongyang itself. The Guard Command became determined to fight, even if it meant Pyongyang would burn. However, the Guard Command made one crucial misjudgment. Due to China's major electronic jamming and cyber attacks, North Korea's communication network stopped working. Communication between military units wasn't working properly. Seeing only 2 Chinese coastal units had arrived, the Guard Command ordered North Korea's 12th Corps to attack their rear. And they started to think that they had a chance. A cabinet meeting to decide the Republic of Korea's fate is underway. Inside the dimly lit conference room, key government officials are seated around a long table. Everyone's expression is tense, and the air is filled with a sense of suspense. At this moment, President Lee Myung-hun began to speak. He asserted that the current crisis is a situation that South Korea has never experienced before. He stressed that with the Chinese military attempting to occupy Pyongyang now, our country's future is at risk. He told all ministers to share their views logically, not emotionally. Minister of National Defense Lee Jong-hwan steps forward and firmly states there are only 2 options. Either we advance north right now and fight against the Chinese forces, or we leave the security of the Republic of Korea in China's hands. He warned that if we hesitate, Chinese forces will move south and North Korea will become a strategic base for China instead of a buffer zone. If China advances into the East Sea and puts pressure on Korea, Korea will inevitably become powerless between the United States and China. Then Minister of Economy and Finance Jong-han Gyeol strongly refuted. He argued that moving north would trigger full-scale war and instantly collapse the economy. He warned that large corporations and investment capital would leave, causing Korea's foreign-dependent economy to collapse. He said we should minimize damage and use war only as a last resort. National Security Director Lee Jae-mok intervened. He stressed that the economy and security are inseparable, as economic stability depends on trust in national security. He pointed out that public opinion demanding war is already rising among the people, and if a decision is not made now, trust in the government itself will collapse. The meeting room grew tense with heated arguments, but he calmed everyone. He emphasized. He stressed that starting a war without United States help would be suicidal. Finally, President Lee Myung-in, after observing and hearing everyone's views, made a firm decision. He said we can't waste time. If China controls all of North Korea, South Korea's future will vanish and war costs will be huge. President Lee Myung-han then instructed to strengthen diplomatic pressure and cooperation with the United States, and at the same time to be fully prepared to take immediate military action. The Ministry of National Defense activated the Northward Plan and ordered special forces to stand by. The Ministry of Strategy and Finance was told to quickly allocate a wartime budget and prepare to inform the public of the emergency. It was simple and clear. Lee Myung-han, the president, said we must act if the people want it or risk losing everything if we hesitate. He said history will judge our choice. As his voice faded, silence filled the conference room. Everyone nodded at the president's decision. Meanwhile, China and the United States met privately. Fears that events on the Korean peninsula could trigger a China-United States war and possibly World War III prompted this. The United States insisted that China withdraw its troops from North Korea, but China countered that it was acting in accordance with the China-North Korea Mutual Aid and Cooperation Friendship Treaty. When the United States threatened China with military force, China eventually backed down. Their talks were held in secret. No one noticed, and finally a conclusion was reached. This conclusion showed that international politics is driven by major powers' interests and power logic. Since the United States wanted to avoid a third world war, they gave up some demands to China. In Beijing, China and the United States exchanged smiles during negotiations. Ultimately, only the great powers' interests mattered, and the Korean peninsula was ignored. The National Intelligence Service kept gathering and analyzing information on North Korea, as this was all it could currently do. South Korea faced a tough situation. Although public opinion was united, there were still strong objections from some groups, and there were definitely people who said they couldn't trust President Lee Myung-hwan's leadership. There was conflict with the United States about advancing north, leaving us feeling like a candle in the wind. In fact, the South Korean government did show a firm determination to advance north, but they couldn't actually carry it out, because there was a vague fear and anxiety about the idea of daring to go to war with China. A war would clearly cause hundreds or thousands of companies to go bankrupt and many deaths. There needed to be enough justification to advance north. In that situation, the South Korean military was using special forces to infiltrate troops into North Korea. These locations included the demilitarized zone Nampo, Wonsan, Sinuiju, Haiju, and Simpo. The South Korean military runs 10 to 20 communication posts in North Korea. Most of these communication posts were disguised as civilian buildings, and some were even located in the hills. They used these posts to stay in constant contact with South Korean headquarters. There were more before, but after the North Korea intelligence room collapsed in 2024, we had to start over. So, we created about 10 to 20 of them. Special Forces troops infiltrated here and prepared in advance which locations to move to in case they had to advance north. They sabotaged North Korean military sites and sometimes made key deaths look like accidents. In the United States, someone kept providing information. This let them estimate Chinese military positions and North Korea's possible actions. Seon members mainly found new information near Pyongyang. While not highly classified, they could still identify North Korea's underground bunkers and the cabinet's location. Thanks to these efforts, South Korea was slowly rebuilding its human intelligence network, though not to its former level. The South Korean military also responded by mobilizing all available resources such as reconnaissance aircraft and military satellites to gather information inside North Korea as if they were searching for a needle in a haystack. Time was of the essence. No one knew when the order to move north would arrive, while police remained active domestically. Someone pretended to accidentally film the National Intelligence Service building with a drone while shooting Haeunennung Historic Site number 194, but was actually a Chinese spy. He was secretly filming major facilities like the National Intelligence Service with a drone and providing the information to China. Similar incidents were happening all over the country. Information on military bases, nuclear plants, and key facilities was being shared in multiple locations. The police were conducting counterintelligence operations regarding the situations occurring internally and were catching spies one by one. Meanwhile, the Guard Command's nuclear threats against China stopped working. This time, the Chinese military had three main goals during their intervention in North Korea's crisis. The first is to protect the lives and property of Chinese citizens in North Korea. This was the decisive reason that led China to intervene in North Korea's sudden crisis. The goals are to rescue Chinese citizens and entrepreneurs from North Korean prisons and to dissolve the North Korean cabinet led by General Kwak Chong-sik of the Guard Command. China calls General Guo Changxik's cabinet procedurally flawed and illegal, and seeks to form a legitimate cabinet through proper procedures. Although they called it a goal, it was really about putting pro-Chinese figures in key North Korean positions for their own interests. The third goal was to control all of North Korea's nuclear facilities. North Korea currently has 28 nuclear and 21 biological weapon production facilities. Most are north of Pyongyang. The 78th Group Army advances into Hamgyong Province, and with the 79th Group Army targets Pyongyang North Road with 3 brigades to secure nuclear facilities. Similarly, only 2 brigades and airborne troops target Pyongyang to secure these nuclear facilities. In the case of the 79th Group Army, which was targeting Pyongyang, they began to take control of all 13 nuclear facility sites located in North Pyongan Province and South Pyongan Province north of Pyongyang. This covered the reactor and light water reactor in Taechon, uranium mines, storage facilities, and the uranium enrichment facility in Cheonmasan. The 78th Group Army moved into Hamgyong Province. They took over uranium mines and storage in Musan and Rajin, and targeted the Punggye-ri nuclear test site, the center of North Korea's nuclear program. The reason China tried to take control of North Korea's nuclear facilities like this was because they assumed North Korea might take unexpected actions with nuclear weapons, and also to gain international support. There could have been people who called it an illegal war of aggression, and in fact, there actually were. The 78th Group Army seized the Punggye-ri nuclear test site with little resistance and advanced toward Hamhung through Kimchaik. But that was the story. Thank you for watching. Thank you for watching. Thank you for watching.
Thank you for watching. Thank you for watching. Thank you for watching.